Tonight, as Blake asked me every Wednesday night, is it not Psalms or is it Psalms? This is a not Psalms night. But I still want to continue a thought process that started just in spring concerning just ways that we can just be better at what we do as a Christian, better servants of God, better to each other, just better in general. And maybe these are some things tonight that can help us to do that. I want to begin with Ephesians 4. Ephesians 4, beginning at verse 1, says, I therefore, the prisoner of the Lord, beseech you to walk worthy of the calling with which you were called, with all lowliness and gentleness, with long suffering, bearing with one another in love, endeavoring to keep the unity of the Spirit in the bond of peace. There is one body, one Spirit, just as you were called into one hope of your calling, one Lord, one faith, one baptism, one God and Father of all, who's above all and through all and in you all. So it says here in verse 3 to basically saying to make an effort of every kind that we can, an effort to endeavor to keep the unity of the Spirit through the bond of peace. Now this verse reminds us that togetherness is not something, I've often wondered why we have to endeavor for unity. We stress so much, and I think we tend to go to extremes sometimes. And I'm not just talking about us as a congregation. I'm talking about us as a church, as a whole throughout the brotherhood. I think we sometimes think about and teach, we don't need to compare ourselves with each other. Paul tells us to do that. Don't compare yourself with each other. I can't look at Titus and say, boy, I wish I could lead singing like Titus, or look at someone else, boy, I wish I could pray, or wish I could preach this way, or wish I could do these. We're not to compare ourselves with each other because we all have different abilities. We have different opportunities. We have different things and talents in which we do within the body. But having said that, one thing I think we've got to be careful is not to emphasize those differences so much where it divides us. And what I mean by that, sometimes we just think we're so different, and our personalities are different anyway a lot of times. And I think that shows up in a negative sense sometimes when we're addressing different things, when we're talking about things, discussing things. Sometimes those personalities can show up, and that desire to endeavor for peace and unity sometimes not there. And you can see it in people's attitudes that unity is not what they're striving for. It could even be popularity. It could be a little bit of empowerment. Whatever the case may be, sometimes we try to show these differences. Oh, you're different than me, so let me kind of degrade you a little bit to make myself look better. And I'm afraid that happens sometimes. Just because sometimes we think differently, sometimes we have different opinions on things and discussing things. It's hard to discuss sometimes because I just think sometimes unity is not on the forefront of our minds. And again, I'm talking as us as a whole sometimes as Christians. And I think because we approach things differently. Can I still stay true to doctrine, but come at it and approach it sometimes in a different way? I'm not talking about changing doctrine. I'm talking about how I get there may be different than how you got there in your studies. Is that possible? Because of our experiences, because of how we may have been brought up, because of other things. We get to the doctrine and we understand that doctrine needs to be a certain way, but sometimes how we get there might be different. Should I have a little bit of respect for that, for somebody else? To think about that and do that, the difference. I think sometimes it's like a jigsaw puzzle. We're all trying to put those pieces together, but sometimes we don't put a puzzle together. You ever try to put a jigsaw puzzle together with somebody else? Do they do it different than you do? Who in here puts a puzzle together and does not start with the outside in pieces? Everybody starts with the end pieces, don't they? You got to find those first, those straight pieces. You got to get those first. Huh? Do you understand? I'm talking about the border. You got to put the border around first. Yeah, you got to do the border first. I've got a grandson who doesn't do that. I watch him. He looks at the picture, and he knows the picture, and he puts it together by the picture. He may be in the middle. Talking about Mathis. He may be in the middle. He may be in a corner. He may be over here. And I'm sitting here trying to find the end pieces, and I'm looking over here at him like, what are you doing? The next thing I know, he's got the puzzle together. And I'm still trying to work over here, and he's looking at me like, give me that last piece that you've been holding for 20 minutes. You know, and he just puts it together differently. You know, I'm looking at him like, you got to do it my way. Let's take it apart again. Let's start. You got to put these end pieces together. You know, sometimes it's hard to work together when you're trying to get to the same goal, but you do it differently, don't you? And I think that's what happens in the church sometimes. We're getting to the same goal, but getting to it differently is hard to accept sometimes. It's hard to accept someone other in discussing and trying to get to those things. And I think that's why the Bible stresses we've got to endeavor to strive for that unity in spirit in the bond of peace. We're trying to get unity. We're trying to have peace. Now, it's not this at any cost. It's not this at compromise. But I think there does have to be some adjusting. There does have to be preferring the other person to be able to achieve that, doesn't there? I have to look at that other person, don't I? I have to think about their feelings. I have to think about where they're coming from to get to that. Sometimes I tell you how I think of it. And she may be watching. She's not here tonight, but she may be watching, so I'm going to be careful how I explain this. I don't know if you ever took geometry under Peggy Anderson. Anybody in here ever done that? I did. And one thing I always remembered, I'd get an answer wrong because I got to the right answer the wrong way. Now, I never understood that. I never understood how you can get to the right answer the wrong way. But there was a certain way to do it. And yeah, you may get this answer right, but I did find out later as you go on, if you still use that same thought process, it's going to end up wrong. But I never could understand getting it counted wrong. Matter of fact, it'd only count half wrong, because if you got the answer right, she'd count that, but she'd still count off if you got to it a different way. And I never understood that, but it took me a while. But I think about that a lot today. Even that was back in the 9th, 10th grade, I guess. I believe is when that was. And I still think about it at my age today, because I think about it because I look and I say, okay, here's the right answer. Here's how it's got to be. But I do understand that there's a process to get to that. But I have to understand that when we're talking about doctrine, sometimes people get at it at a different way. And it doesn't make it wrong. It comes from their experience. Does that make any sense? And we got to be careful with that.
I feel like, and I haven't read a lot, but even if you read Brotherhood material from 50 years ago to 100 years ago, the doctrine is not different, but the focus at times is, and the extrapolations out of it is. I collected gospel minutes from the 1950s or whatever, maybe a little bit later, and some of the stuff I read in there doesn't sound the same as some of the same arguments I hear today. So I think we've got to give grace even that a strong brother that lived 100 years before us, who may have come out of a different direction, we can't condemn him because we've moved on to this new argument or something like that.
Yeah.
It's kind of
And I think you bring up a good point. I think it's what is our focus now? The answer is still the same, but our focus may be on a different point now. And we all, as I say, come at it at different ways. Do you have something, Joe?
Don't you think that this, because we do bring different gifts or talents, or we travel a different road, doesn't this make a greater importance on the assembly to be here when you can and to participate? And because that just reinforces, because you just brought up different ways of learning, and maybe I'm stuck, but now because you used his son as an idea, okay, I can look at this now differently. To me, everything you're saying is why the assembly is so important to all of us, because we are different and we have traveled different paths, and we do look at things Titus just brought up about different ages, people that wrote something 50 years ago. The message is the same, but the delivery is different. And maybe now someone will hear it, that something was written 50 years ago, and then you have that aha moment.
Mm-hmm.
It's clearer now.
Oh yeah, I mean it's and sometimes it means different things. That's one thing I got out of our last retreat that I really enjoyed thinking about when we got together in different groups as far as age and solving the same problem. It was interesting how the different age groups a lot of times got to the same answer but a different way, because it's based on where you're at in your life, what you're experiencing in your life now, what that particular thing means to you. And you bring up a good point when it comes to the assembly, because that's the point I'm trying to stress tonight is Christianity is individual. I mean, it's individual to the point of I've got to make sure I'm doing what I'm supposed to first and foremost, or I can't help anything else. But Christianity isn't only that, it's a collective thing. That's where I think the difficulty starts. Sometimes we focus and pursue our own things so much that we forget about this collective effort of where this peace and unity has to be to strive to get to that goal. Because when it comes to unity, I think unity has two parts to it. I think that's our goal, but I also think it's a byproduct of doing what we're supposed to do anyway. It's a goal that we need to endeavor for. It's a goal, and I think this, if nothing else, this tells us in Ephesians that it's not something that just comes, that we're we have this disposition of automatically being in unity. I think it's something we have to work at because we have different personalities. You can look at the apostles and see that. Look at who Jesus picked, how different they were. Can you imagine the struggle that was to work together for that? And I just think that's a good representation of the world. You know, he said, if I can get these 12 to agree on this, maybe we got a shot at it. You know, and I'm being a little bit kind of flippant there, but you look at how different they are. I think that was the point. I really do. I think being different like that was, okay, take all of these different abilities, take all of these different personalities, these different backgrounds, and show that this is what the gospel is supposed to do. It's to bring these together to be able to learn to work together so they can be able to go out and teach.
Our preacher back in Maryland once said, what we're doing here tonight, what we do while we're on planet Earth, this is practice.
Yeah.
We're honing our Christian skills. We're learning. Heaven is where, if we can't get along here, we're not going to get along in heaven.
Right.
We know that that's not going to, you know, what I'm saying is we've got to learn to compromise. We've got to learn to live together here. This is practice. But when we get to heaven, that's the final product.
Exactly.
Sometimes practice is very difficult.
Mm-hmm.
Sometimes you got to try over and over and over to get one task accomplished.
Yeah. And you think about a lot of things that we do over and over again that's commanded for us to do. And again, I think that's the point. It ought to be second nature to us. We don't need to look at it as being in a rut. We need to look at it, okay, this has become who I am. This has become not what I'm supposed to do, but what I do, you know. And I think unity should get to that point. And I kind of been thinking about this, about how is that achieved? And that's some great sermon, I guess, that somebody can preach of this is what you do. But I do think there's some practical things that we can do to achieve that. And I think we'll have time for about 3 of them tonight. But I think one of them is, well, all 3 of them, I think it starts with having that right relationship with God. If we don't have that first and foremost, really nothing else matters. So having that, pursuing that right relationship with Jesus, but also after that is pursuing a life of service. And the reason I think about that is because that takes the focus off of ourselves. It takes the focus off of, it's just about me. It's about looking out and seeing how I can help in practical ways those that's around me. And then the third thing I think is striving and pursuing that virtuous life that sometimes we think is so unattainable, but I think it's something that we should live. And I think if you put those three things together in a collective manner, I think we would have that kind of unity that he strives to have. So I want to kind of look at that this evening. Look at John 17 and 21. Jesus says that they all may be one as you, Father, are in me, and I in you, that they also may be one in us, that the world may believe that you sent me. So when Jesus is praying, what kind of relationship is he saying we should have with each other? One. He says that they may be one like you and I are one. So we've got to have a relationship that is, how do we have a relationship like the Father and Son have? How do you have that kind of relationship? What is that going to be like? So we've got to strive to be like Jesus in order to do this. So I've got to pursue to know Him, to be like Him. You know, I was thinking of, and I don't think I gave it to you, Jonathan, but 1 John 1 and 7, you know, walk in the light as He is in light. We have fellowship one with another, and the blood of Jesus Christ cleanses us from our sins. You know, you think about the first part of that, walk in the light as He is in the light. And I've said it from this pulpit, you know, we've got to walk in that light. If we're not walking in that light, we're not doing right. But that's really not what it's saying. It's not just about walking in the light. I've got to walk in the light as He is in the light. So if I'm walking in that light like Him, as He is, that's not just walking. That's thinking about it, isn't it? That's intentional. That's thinking like He is thinking, doing what He would do, being like He would be, having that mind that He has. So I've got to pursue that kind of relationship to where I know as much as revealed through His Word about Him. So I can't be like Him if I don't know anything about Him. I've got to know all that I can about Him so I can be like He is. Notice in Matthew chapter 22, beginning at verse 37. Notice Jesus said to them, "You shall love the Lord your God with all your heart, with all your soul, with all your mind. This is the first and great commandment. And the second is like it. You shall love your neighbor as yourself. On these two commandments hang all the law and the prophets." So as we follow Jesus and then develop in our love for Him, we also, I think, grow in our abilities to love each other as much as that we possibly can. You think about these two things. We love God with all that we have, and then love our neighbor as ourselves. You put those three things together, then we're thinking as we should think, shouldn't we? You know, we can throw all these other things in it, but when it basically comes down to that, if we love God with everything that we have, what are we going to naturally do? We're going to love those around us like we do ourselves, because we're going to love ourselves like we're supposed to. So before I can have unity, before I can have peace, I think I've got to have that kind of relationship with God so I can have that kind of relationship with those that are around me. Maybe that might be part of the problem, is we're not pursuing that kind of relationship like we should. Maybe we need to think about that a little closer. Maybe we need to think about what our relationship with God is. In Galatians 2 and verse 20, Paul says, "I have been crucified with Christ. It is no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. And the life which I now live in the flesh, I live by faith in the Son of God who loved me and gave Himself for me." Paul here, think about what he said. I've been crucified with Christ. What do you think he means by that? I don't read anything in Scripture where Paul was hanging there beside of him. So what do you think he means? He's been crucified with Christ, and it's no longer I who live, but Christ that lives in me. What's he mean by that? Yeah, he's all in.
He's all in, just like
And he describes it in this verse, doesn't he? He says, it's no longer I who live. So I'm crucified with Christ, so it's no longer I who live now. I'm dead to that. And Paul talks about this a lot. Romans 12, he talks about this. I beseech you, brethren, by the mercies of God, present your bodies a living sacrifice. You know, your body is a living sacrifice to them. And he says, that's your reasonable service. I like that because he's saying that's what you're supposed to be doing. It's reasonable. It should be second nature to you. It should be part of who you are. It's no longer you that live. It's Christ that lives in you. So in doing that, what are you doing? You're thinking like Him. You're trying to be like Him. You're trying to not think of your own will. Because see, here's what happens. When I submit myself to Christ, would it be easier for me now to think about somebody else's feelings or abilities, or think about somebody but myself, wouldn't it? It'd be easier for me to think about how somebody else is getting to the place they need to be. It's easier for me to look and see if someone is struggling. It's easier for me to look and see if somebody needs encouraging, because I'm not looking at myself anymore. I've crucified myself. It's no longer I who live, but Christ who lives in me. So if He's living in me, I'm looking at it, as it were, through His eyes. And what did He do? He died for the world. You know, He was here to serve. And one of the last things He did with those that's close to Him is wash their feet to show His service to them. Because that's what He wanted to leave to them. This is what I want you to be to each other. I don't want you to be who's going to be the greatest. I don't want you to be, look how superior I am, and look how you are over here. I don't want you to be like those that say, oh God, aren't you glad I'm on your team, but I'm not like this person over here. Which one of them's going out justified? You know, He's showing us all these things to say, don't be like that, because I wasn't like that. I was in service. I died for you. What are you willing to do? You're supposed to take up your cross daily. You make that decision daily that I'm going to serve somebody else. And that brings us to our next point. So our relationship, it's not just about pursuing Christ, it's pursuing service. In John chapter 13, beginning at verse 34, a new commandment I give to you, that you love one another as I have loved you, that you also love one another. By this all will know that you're my disciples, if you have love for one another. A couple of things that I think he says here. One is, it's not an option. It's a commandment. I'm to love. I'm to want the best for this person. And he says, here's the reason why, because they'll know you're my disciple. This is your badge of discipleship. This is what's going to make you different than the world, because you're going to act different than the world. You're going to show hospitality different than the world. You're going to show love different than the world. You're going to show service different than the world does. So they'll know that's his disciple. That's what's going to distinguish you. Now notice, when he says, so they'll know you're my disciple, why wasn't it a lot of... why did he pick this? Why didn't he say, if you'll just get over here and preach the truth, people know that you're my disciple? Why wasn't that the badge of discipleship? Or if you'll get on Facebook and you start preaching to people, that's my badge of discipleship. Or you get on some platform and you start, talking about how often, why wasn't it any of this? You say, well, Facebook didn't exist. Well, why didn't you say, if you get on a boat and start screaming to people then? Why do you think this is what he's saying? This is the badge of discipleship. I'm not saying speaking the truth's not important. I'm not saying preaching the truth's not. I'm not saying living the truth's not important. But when he says this is what's going to cause people to know that you're my disciple, why was that going to be the distinguishing factor?
Because your life is the biggest thing you can give up. Mm-hmm. There is nothing greater than your life that you can give to anything. I looked at John 15:13. Greater love has no one than this, than to lay down one's life for his friends. You are my friends if you do whatever I command you to do. Jesus is saying exactly that. The greatest gift we can give is full devotion, life. There's nothing else.
I was thinking about when remember when they were meeting trying to decide about killing Jesus? Remember what was said? just wait and look and see what becomes of it. There's been others that come and they died, and then what happened? Their disciples just scattered away. It came to nothing. Another come up and they died, and it came to nothing. This didn't come to nothing. So, I mean, think about it. I want to be careful how I say this because I don't want you to misunderstand. Preaching and teaching is important. These things are essential. But there's false teachers out there all over the world, aren't they? That just stands up on street corners and start preaching. So preaching isn't anything different to people. Now, you want to preach the truth, but that's not something that's going to necessarily just stand out in somebody's mind. Other things aren't going to stand out in somebody's mind. You start acting like different than the world acts. You start loving your enemy. You start showing service to someone that somebody else wouldn't show a service to. That's going to stand out, isn't it? That's going to cause people to listen to the teaching. Instead of just starting out with the preaching, start out with the service to get them to listen to the preaching. Giving hearing to the gospel. Does that make sense? I really think this is why he is distinguishing this, because this level of service, this level of devotion, this level of love, this level of humility is different than the world. This is going to get the world to look and say, okay, there's something different about that. There's something different about what they're doing. They're not just standing on the street corners beating themselves up and fasting and praying real loud where people can hear them and these types. They're doing something different. They're helping the poor. They're feeding someone that's hungry. They're bringing somebody a drink of water that's thirsty. They're clothing someone that needs food. They're visiting someone that's in prison. They're doing something different. What are they doing? They're showing their love for Jesus. And why do you think it's lasted as long? I think it's what Jeremy was saying back there. That shows that you're all in. That shows full commitment to it, to act different. I tell you, I really find myself here lately stopping in the middle sometimes of a sentence, stopping in the middle of an action, and just thinking, how is this going to look on Jesus? What I'm about to say here, how's that going to affect my influence with this person when it comes to and I tell you, if you do that enough, that'll change how you talk. That'll change your conversation. That'll change your actions. That'll keep you from getting frustrated. That'll keep you from getting, and I'm not saying I'm doing all that good at it, but I'm doing better at it. I'm really trying to think about the things that I talk about and the things that I express and the feelings that I show towards somebody sometimes if I get frustrated. And I think, is that really how it should be? So what would make me any different than this person over here that I just heard do the same thing? Lose their temper or get frustrated or get aggravated real easy. How am I any different than that? So how am I distinguishing myself? I wasn't. And so Jesus says, this is how the world's going to know. Show love for one another. And that can get a little bit tricky. That can get a little bit of thought and honesty to it. But again, we're striving for the goal of unity and peace in the spirit of peace. And we're doing that. And if we do that, then the byproduct is going to be that. If we're living for Him anyway as we should. Notice what Paul states, back to one of our verses that we've been dealing with for a while. Philippians 2, beginning at verse 3. Let nothing be done through selfish ambition or conceit, but in lowliness of mind let each esteem others better than himself. Let each of you look out not only for his own interest, but also for the interest of others. So if I'm looking out for the interest of others, and let me go back to what I was talking about in geometry class. You get the right answer, but you get it the wrong way.
what if I'm in a situation where I'm talking to someone about a biblical issue, and I'm right on that because I'm following what the Scripture says, but I do that in a wrong way, and I come to the right answer, did I really do any good? Why? The way you did it. I may turn them off. It may not even matter now that it's right. They wouldn't want to do it anyway because how I come about doing it. It's like I watched on a sitcom. It's a long time ago. It was back, I don't even remember the show. It was about a father that was meeting a prospective boyfriend of his daughter, and a lot of things happened that he didn't like for this guy to come along. And as he was talking to him, he said, it's not anything to do with you, it's how you've been presented to me. He said, you may be a steak, but you've been presented to me on a garbage can lid. He said, so I don't like the steak because it's on a garbage can lid, you know. And what he was saying was, nothing wrong with you, it's just how you've been presented. And so think about that when it comes to the gospel. If I don't present it in the right way or handle things in the right way, are they going to accept what's good for them anyway? Are they going to do it? Maybe I've made them so mad to start with that they don't want to listen to it now anyway. Or maybe I've degraded them enough. And whatever it is, we've got to be careful how we come to that. We've got to come to the right conclusion of what Scripture is, but how we get to it matters. Because it's the sword of the Spirit. If I don't know how to use that sword, I can cause more damage than good. Bill?
It's wrapped up in one word, tact. What tact do you use?
Mm-hmm.
That makes a big difference.
Yeah. And we tend to hide behind the truth when we don't have any tact. We get, they just don't want to hear the truth. You know, they just want to hear the truth. I heard a preacher one time at a funeral, and I tell you, for 45 minutes, all he did during that funeral was talk about how bad congregations were around this area. Different congregations that he didn't agree with. In a funeral, all through the funeral, 45 minutes of it. And I thought, even if he's right, and he was right in some of the cases that I knew of, I thought he overreached on a lot of them, but did it matter at that time? Was that the place? Was that the way? Had nothing to do with it. So, you know, I thought, and that turned me off him immediately, you know. And I discussed that with him at the cemetery. He just said, well, you're like the rest of them. You just don't like hearing the truth. I said, yeah, I like hearing the truth. I just don't like hearing it from you. I mean, I was just that blunt. I'm like, how you presented it, no. It might have been the truth to you and some of the things you said, but how it come from you wasn't what it should be. And I thought he ought to have been ashamed of himself. But I think that's how we can do sometimes. And we want to protect ourselves and defend ourselves by saying, well, we're just staying to the truth. Now, Jesus stayed with the truth, and he made individuals mad because they didn't want to accept what he said. But he also showed compassion to them while doing it. Now, if they still got mad, that's on them. But he still showed compassion, and he still realized the truth was what mattered, and how you reach that person with the truth is what mattered too, of how you presented that.
Just out of curiosity, when you got that.
No, I'm not telling you who it is. No.
When you got that right answer, did Peggy say you need to show your work? Because generally, whenever I had a math class, got the right answer, but then the teacher always said, yeah, but show your work. Is your answer worthy of your work?
Yeah. Oh, I showed my work, and I argued my work. Oh, I was a good litigator there. I just didn't win the case. I just wanted to argue and prove that I was right. And I still have that problem today. It's all about being right. It's not about how you got to being right. And it shouldn't be like that a lot, you know. But again, to her credit, she taught me a great lesson. One, she did give me credit for being right, but also counted it wrong for I got there wrong. I didn't understand the lesson then. I do now. But when you think about, but you put it on turn, and I tend to do that. I tend to look at things
over my life, and I'll try to put a spiritual application to it, because to me, teaching and things, if I can't apply it to my life, it doesn't help me that much. So I always make sure I can apply it to my life. And I think, okay, I take this lesson, and am I using those same ways that I do things here? Do I use that same line of thinking when it comes to doctrine and it comes to my Christianity? And sometimes I do, and I shouldn't. I shouldn't use that same thinking in doing that. I should make sure that I'm using the process of, okay, what am I trying to achieve here? It's not about I'm right and you're wrong. It's about I want to follow what God says, and I want others to too. What's the best way that I could reach those individuals and discuss? And what's the best way that I could get there? What's the best way for Jeff and I to discuss Scripture without getting upset if we have different opinions on certain things? What's the best way I can do that? Just tell him he's wrong and I don't want to talk to him anymore, and you're crazy and you shouldn't, or, well, that, let me think about that way, because it's, it's hard for us to do. We don't want to. We want to slam that Bible shut and say, you're not going to convince me of this. And it's not about convincing me of anything or him of anything. It's about trying to get to the goal that we're trying to achieve as we work through it together. And sometimes working through that process, sometimes we're going to get some wrong answers along the way till we get to the right answer. But that's how you get to the right answer, isn't it? Practice. To use a sporting thing, you can't just go out on the field and expect to get it all right. You practice. And you go out on the field or on the basketball court or on the ball court and you do the best that you can. You realize, okay, I still didn't do this right. I still didn't do this part right. And so let's go back and try to, and pretty soon you get to your goal that you're trying to get to. Is Christianity much different than that? I'm not saying it's just some sporting event, but I'm trying to get to heaven, and along the way I'm going to realize there's some things that I'm doing I shouldn't be doing them that way. It's not working. I'm not achieving the goal that He wants me to achieve. And I think it's because we skip over things like this. We skip over the things of serving one another and having the right kind of attitude. It's like we're jumping on the train at the track down here when we should have been on it back here. We forgot to do this part. And it's hard to get to point A to point B if you skip somewhere in there, And we've got to make sure that we're striving to do that. Does that make any sense? Again, I'm not minimizing Scripture. I'm not minimizing doctrine. Doesn't say that it doesn't matter what doctrine you do. I'm just saying people get to that goal differently sometimes because their thought process is different. And sometimes we got to allow each other a little bit of courtesy to get there, to be able to discuss things, to be able to, isn't that the purpose of coming together collectively at Bible study? Is to be able to do that. There's things that I come in and I have planned and I'm like, this is the direction I want to go, and somebody may make a comment, somebody may say something, and I'm thinking, I'm not seeing it from that point of view. Because, you know what? Because I've not experienced what you've experienced. I've not got the things that you do, so I may not even been thinking to that. We're getting to the same answer, but we got to it differently because we had different, and I think we got to allow for that, and that's not easy sometimes.
I think a lot of times it teaches what we consider to be sound teaching, which is, hey, you need to know about baptism, about instruments, about worship. Absolutely important. You can put most of that on a bookmark and hand it to somebody after they get baptized. If Christianity is just, hey, here's this bookmark full of information you got to memorize, stick to this, and then when you die, you're good. That's all Christianity was. I don't understand any of the New Testament about striving and again, maintaining the bond of unity. It's when we skip this stuff is what makes it easy. But there's nothing easy about that stuff. What you're talking about is hard, and that's the part that, again, we can't just put it on a bookmark and say, be good to each other. Because the actual practice of that is difficult no matter what.
Well, you take those practical things, and I'm handing somebody that bookmark, and they look at me, they say, have you done that? Have you had faith? Have you repented? Have you been baptized? Yeah, I've done that. Well, okay, tell me what doing that, how's that made you different? How is this going to help me in any way or change me in any way? Can we answer those things? What has coming up out of that water did for us? How has it made us different? How has
How has it made us talk different? How does it make us dress different? How does it make us act different? How does it make us go different places? I mean, there's got to be something different. I think that goes back to what John was saying on Sunday about how our righteousness has to exceed that of the scribes and Pharisees. You look at the things that they were doing. I mean, they gave, they prayed, they fasted, they've done all of that. How is my righteousness supposed to exceed that? How it exceeds that is be a whole different kind of righteousness. Be the right kind of righteousness, not self-righteous. Be the righteous that looks for that other person. Well, let's skip down to 1 Corinthians 13. Notice what Paul says here about love. Love suffers long and is kind. Love does not envy. Love does not parade itself. It's not puffed up. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. Is not provoked. Thinks no evil. Does not rejoice in iniquity, but rejoices in the truth. Bears all things. Believes all things. Hopes all things. Endures all things. Love never fails. So you think about, Jesus said, love one another. That's the commandment. That's how people are going to know you're different. Here's what love involves. It doesn't envy. Doesn't puff itself up. Does not behave rudely. Does not seek its own. Do we really practice love that way? That we don't do those things, or we do those things that love does do? You know, if I wanted the real test of, do I truly love like I should? Am I doing these things and not doing these things? And that's a hard look to take. And again, I'm talking about church as a whole. We're autonomous. We each have elderships. We each, have, but we should still all be one, shouldn't we? We should be all have the same mind as far as the mind of Christ, and preferring each other and realizing each other. I think it would go a long way with our influence to the world and endeavoring for peace, that bond of peace, that unity that we're striving for. I think that would go a long way, because we couldn't help but have the humility that we need to be able to have it. I think that's really what it boils down to have unity. I think first and foremost, you got to be humble. Humble enough to submit yourself to Christ, humble enough to submit yourself to what He says for us to do, and humble enough to serve as He would have us to serve.
And I also think, and I suffered from this personally for a long time after I was baptized, we need to take away the word. When someone says, why do you do that? Because I have to. No, it's because I want to. It's not because, well, a Christian has to do this. A Christian has to act this way. No, I want to do this. It's not I have to. And I think sometimes we have a tug of war there. Boy, it's really pouring down rain, or it's snowing heavy. I don't know that I want it. No, I want to go to church today.
Mhm.
And sometimes I think we get in a tug of war with those two words,
Yeah.
between having to do it with that mentality, or I want to do it. I want to do it because I love this.
Mhm.
I love being a Christian.
Yeah, I think it has to come down to sometime, not Christianity something we have to do, something that we want to do,
Yeah.
desire to do it. And once it does, then I think these other things will become easier to do.
Then when you're doing it because you want to, because you've embraced it, and you love it.
Yeah, right. Yeah. I appreciate your comments.